We're going to present today an application that we built to do COVID attestations. So for when you sort of go into your doctor's office, or if you're going back into the office. So we'll be showing that example for you today. I'm Derek Cash-Peterson. I'm presenting today with Julie Turner. We both work at Sympraxis Consulting in Boston. And so the first question really is, why did we go ahead and build this? And the story here is, we've all sort of seen this over the last year and a half through COVID that folks are asking for information when you go to the doctor's office, or when you go to drop your kid off at school or what have you. And they're asking questions about, have you been exposed? What is your potential risk profile? So as companies and countries are starting to open their offices back up, we wanted to provide a way through Teams to allow that to happen. We wanted to be able to track who is in the office at any given time. And we also wanted to provide a way for administrators or HR folks or human resources folks to notify people if they've potentially been exposed. So it's that contact tracing piece. So what we did was we built a Teams personal app that sits inside on the rail. And if it's not there by default, you can just go in and click the button. Now, for your average user, they're going to log in and they'll only see self-check-in. And we've created these questions so they can come in and they can select, say, what office they're in. We've got Japan, we've got Boston. So, they say whether or not they've had a fever, what is their temperature. These are all configurable, and I'll show that in a couple of minutes. Sort of generic COVID-related symptom questions. And then when they're done, they save the response. And they can submit this once a day. And at this point, their job is done. This person is at home, they're getting ready to go into the office. So they fill out the form, and when they're done, they click submit, and then they're on their way. They can go to the office. Now, for me, I'm at the front desk, and I can see whoever is in the office. I can see all the folks here that have checked in or are in the process of checking in. So we built this dashboard. It lets you flick through the different dates. So you can see the different people's names on the left. You can see what office that they've decided to check into. You can also see the date and the time that they've submitted their form. And the green indicates whether or not they've checked into the office or not, and then the check-in time that they've checked in at the office. So you can see Thor Ironsides is the person that just checked in. He hasn't checked in yet, so he came to the office. I'm going to check him in. I'm going to review all of these details with him, what he submitted in that form. There's no real personal information in here. So we didn't sort of, there's not really HIPAA or in the US requirements there. So the front desk person can just go ahead and check them in and say, okay, these all look good. Maybe ask them to verify that. And then they can check the user into the office. And at this point now, it's assumed that they go to their office, go to their meeting, whatever it is they have to do. So because they're at the front desk person also has the ability to check in themselves. But they also have the ability to check in a guest. So say there's a guest here to see Thor. The front desk person can now come in, they can enter that name, they can enter the location, and they can fill out the form on behalf of that person. Now, one thing that's a little bit different is that because this is a guest user, and I just ran through this verbally with the guest user, we check them in automatically. So there's no question because we just ran through it. We don't need to double check everything with them. The other thing that you'll notice is that in the icons on the left-hand side, if any of these people were online, their presence would be notified here. So they would have the Teams, whatever the appropriate color is, red, yellow, green, whatever for Teams. So that's the experience for, say, the front desk person. But now what if you are an HR person and you need to notify potential employees of a possible exposure? By default, this shows the past 2 weeks. There's search capabilities that lets you filter this down. to a specific set of days, and you can search by days. You can search by by office. So you can check, just the folks that have registered into the Boston office. And you can also check by person as well. So in this instance, we're going to check and see, what I was doing. And, I was in the Tokyo office on the 9th. So if there was a potential exposure there from me, there was nobody else who had registered, obviously, in the Tokyo office that day because it was closed. But if we look at someone like Carter was in the Boston office. And so now you can see all of these people were in the Boston office at the same time as me. So there's the ability to go in and contact those folks and let them know that they might have possibly been exposed. We also wanted to make you able to administer this through Teams as well. So there's a SharePoint backend for this, and we're surfacing a list of locations. So you can come in here and we can add a new location. So we're going to add one for Chicago in Illinois. And this is just a SharePoint text field, so you can name it whatever naming convention you want to use. And we also provide the ability to customize those questions. So this is a SharePoint list. And if we want to add a new question, we click the new button. And we enter in the title for the question. Now, the way we built this, this supports either yes or no questions or text-based questions. So if you saw in the original form, they were either radio buttons or it was like an open text field for enter your temperature. We also support the ability to reorder the question. So this one's going to be order 800, which is at the end of the list. And you can edit these just right inside of Teams. Now, if the user goes in and the next person that comes in to register, so say the front desk person is registering a guest, you'll notice that at the end of the page, you'll see the question that I just added, and now the office is in there as well. And so all of this sits inside a Teams app, a Teams personal app. Now, we also built an ACE for the adaptive card extensions. And for that, I'm going to hand that over to Julie.
Cool. Thank you, Derek. Okay, so now what we're going to show is the ACE, as Derek pointed out, the adaptive card extension that we can build with the SharePoint Framework 1.13, which Vesa covered at the beginning when he was talking about the SharePoint Framework updates. So we went ahead and built an ACE for the COVID app. And so we can see here that the ACE is on the dashboard, and I have a check-in button that gives me that form. So I can go through as a user and fill out my form and then just go ahead and submit it. And so that's a really quick way that I can get right to the form from my dashboard. That could be in the mobile experience or whatever. And then the configuration itself has me pointing. I have one configuration to point to the site collection where my lists are stored. So that's how that ACE gets set up. And then further, when you click on the ACE itself, it deep links into Teams and takes us right to that COVID app in the private app that loads in Teams. So I can get there and you can see that I submitted my entry in and I'm good to go. So it's a quick, easy extension, but let's look at the code a little bit because I think that's more interesting for people to see. So let me bring up my code now. There we go. Okay, so this adaptive card extension is another addition to the whole solution package that we built. So when we create the solution, originally we had the web parts for the COVID app that you saw, and that COVID admin app is that entire solution that Derek just demoed. So after that, we added an additional adaptive card extension, and that comes through with some templates. So what we're going to start with is showing the adaptive card extension main entry point. And so this loads up the extension, and we have an on init function here. And this is the thing that starts immediately after the page loads. And what we're doing in here is setting up all of the things that we need so that we know, so that the service knows where to get its data, where to write its data, and how to work with the data. And we're just reusing everything we had already built in the web part. So this, this entry here, this CS entry, is the service from the main web part. So if I go down into the web part itself, and I go into the services, that's that COVID service right there. So I'm just reusing the same code base and extending that to give me this functionality. So we go through a init process, and we have some things to decide, like the home site, because the personal app doesn't have a home. It's not like a Teams tab where the home for the solution is in the SharePoint site where the team is. The personal app sort of floats without a home. So we needed to tell the COVID ACE where its home is, so that so PnP.js, which is what I'm using to go get the data from the lists, knows where to get that data. So I'm pointing to where that home is. So that's one of the configurations of the ACE. And then we're registering the card and the quick view, which I'm going to go up. We're initializing PnP.js. And then we have some setup. We need to know who the user is and what their display name is, and checking whether that user is already checked in for today. We need to do that. And initializing our service, and then setting up our state. So our state for the entire ACE, so React has this concept of state, and the ACE has a similar concept of state. So the entire ACE has a state, and we're going to set up whether the user can check in or not. We've determined that, what the user's ID is and what their display name is, and now we can share that with the quick view and the card view. So the card view is the first thing that we load, and that was the card on the main screen. It's super simple. It has a title and a description. There's not a ton to it. And so we're just using the primary text card view. There's 3 different views for the card view. One's an image view, one's a primary text view, and one's this basic view. And so we're just saying, okay, we're going to set up the card, and here's the data for the card. So this function runs, and it sets up the data. So all we're doing is checking, has the user checked in already, and did the service initialize properly? Assuming that the user can check in, it'll show a string of text that says, hey, you can check in. And if they've already checked in, then it's just going to show that they've already checked in and that they can't do anything. And that will determine whether or not that check-in button shows at the bottom. But the card will always deep link. And so that's what this last function here is. The on card selection sets up an external link, and that external link is a deep link in the Teams to the entity that this is. So that number right there, that GUID right there, is the GUID for the web part. And you can find that down in the web parts manifest. So if you look in the web parts manifest, that ID is the ID for that deep link. So let me shut that. Hold on a second, come back. So that's where that deep link URL comes from. Okay, so that's how the card view gets rendered. So assuming that the user can then check in, they have that button, and we've registered that we have a quick view. And the quick view is where we can be a little more dynamic and have a little bit more control of what things look like. So in this case, we're going to build the quick view, and let me just close this so we can have a little more space. And actually, let me close this so we have a little more space. So the quick view is where we got the questions. And so now, if you recall, the questions are dynamic. We have a list of questions, so they're dynamically driven and they can be changed at any time. So we want to be able to dynamically create that quick view, which isn't necessarily super intuitive, because the way the quick view normally works is you have a template and you have the data, and the two merge together and they display the quick view. And if you know what the template's going to be, then in the quick view template JSON file, you can build the template, putting in markers for where your data should merge in, and you're all done. The problem with this particular quick view is that those questions are dynamic. We don't know how many they are, so we don't know how many spots to save for questions, and we don't know what type of question. Is it a text question? Is it a yes/no question? We didn't really know. That's all dynamic. So the way we went about solving this problem is by creating a baseline template. So you can see in here that I have the JSON string for the quick view ACE card template. It has a body section that has a sort of a header. Then it has a text block for the office. We knew it was going to have office. That was going to be one of the fixed things. So I have a text block for the office, and then for the office string, the label office, excuse me. And then I have an input for the choices for the different offices. Those are dynamic. So we wanted to set up a structure to be able to inject those choices into the template. Then we have another container, and in those container, I know I'm going to have a set of items. This is the container that all those questions are going to be injected into. And when I go back to the code, I'll show you how I attained that. But we have this container. It has an items array that's just empty at the moment, but we'll get to that. And then last but not least, we have the action set, which has the submit button and the cancel button. And we can handle those as well. And I'll show you that in a minute. So the only other thing I want to point out is that we have this body. It's an array, and it has a number of items in it. So the 0th place item is this, the 1st place item is this, the 2nd place item is that. I'm pointing it out because we're going to use that information when we come back to the quick view. So let's go back to the quick view, and we've set up some data, types up at the top. Let's get into the meat of it. So we have the data section here where we're going to create the data that is going to be merged into the template. I'm going to skip that for a minute and come down to the template. So normally what we would just do is we'd say, hey, my template is in this file and I just want to return the template. So we'd literally do line 72 and then we'd do line 94, and that would be all you'd need to do because your template would be configured already to have all the placeholders for all the data that you're going to push into it. In our instance, we need to dynamically change that template on the fly. So we're going to load the template in, but then we're going to modify that template as we go along. So in the 0th placeholder of that body array, remember I pointed out that the body has a bunch of objects in that array. I'm going to set a display name for the quick view, and then I'm going to get all the locations out of our service. I'm going to load those into the location options, and so that can be pushed into the template for. So we have the first one, which is the label for the office. So I'm just going to have a string that defines that label that I want for the office, and then the second option item in there was the choice list for the locations. So I'm going to set the choices to those location options that I loaded from the service, which loads them from the SharePoint list. And I'm also going to say the value of that is this location value for that's the label for the data label that's going to merge into that. And then I need to build the questions array. And so those are going to go into that items, which was the 3rd or 4th, depending on if you're zero counting or not. I tend to zero count. The 4th item in our body array is that items list. And so I'm going to walk through all the questions that I've loaded from my service. And depending on whether it was a yes/no question or it was a text, and since I knew I had only one type, so I just have a simple if here, I'm going to create a new yes/no answer and push it into this item array. And so I've created this constructor, and if we go to the definition of that, you can see that I knew what I needed for the values for that based on what the template needed to look like. The JSON object for a checkbox needed to have these values in it. So I built a constructor that allowed me to do that. So then all I have to do is say push a new yes/no answer, and I'm going to pass in the question's ID, the title, and the data placeholder for that question for the yes/no. And the text box has 2 pieces to it. So I needed to push on the text box that has the label and then the text box that is the answer field below it. And again, I'm putting on for that text box with the answer, I need to point out where the data is, what's the merging point, and what the ID is for the question, because I'll need that later. And then, as I said, I push that into the template. So now at this point on line 90, my template is now complete. I dynamically altered it in memory so that it would have the questions that I needed, and that quick view would look the way I need it to look. So now when I return my template, it's all modified the way I need to. And now the solution merges that template with the data. So what I needed for the data is to get answers. So I have all my questions. I needed to set all my answers to blank so that they didn't have any answers so people could finish filling it out, right? And then I return the answers, and then the solution merges the data, i.e. the blank values, with the template and displays that quick view on the screen for the user to fill out. Now, if you recall, at the bottom, we had a submit button and a cancel button. And so the way we handle that is with a feature called on action. And so on action means when you click one of those buttons, it launches this function. This function, then I can say, okay, did they hit submit? If they did, then I'm going to go look at the data, and I'm going to create an entry that I'm going to use our service to submit their answer, all their answers, into a new line item in the self-check-in list in the root site collection. So basically all I'm doing is creating a new title for the list item, and then I'm building the check-in form so that it matches my list. And then I call my service, which I'm using in the main web part, that same service, and I'm just passing in the check-in item with all the data filled out based on what the user entered. So I'm basically dynamically creating that form in a place that's super accessible to the user. In the dashboard view that they'll have, they'll have that on mobile, or it could be right on the home page. It's super right in front of the user. Now, granted, if they're in Teams at home or Teams on their mobile phone, they'll be able to get to the COVID app that way as well. But this might be the place that they start their day once these things start GAing, and once people start implementing the new Viva Desktop, which was the new name for the home site personal app. They might start there instead. And so to be able to have that card and go, oh, right, yeah, I got to check in today, and have that right front and center makes their day go a little faster, right? And that's what we want to have. Instead of them having to click all around, remember to do all those things, it becomes front and center. So that is an overview of how the ACE was built. Vesta, did you have any comments you wanted? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, can we go back on the ACE, just on the
Absolutely.
UX of the ACE? Just to recap what we saw in the code and coming back on, so what we saw in the code, this is how it looks like. So just to be clear, so 1.13, SharePoint Framework 1.13, which is going to be released within a week when we are recording this community call, for those who are watching the video recording. That's the one which will include then the support for creating these cards. And these cards are designed for the primarily mobile first experience to be exposed in the Teams mobile experience. And you build them with SPFx. Now, do you have a video on one more time showing the checking process in here?
Yeah, I can let me just run that again. There you go. So we're clicking the check-in, and there's our dynamic form. So that's what it then looks like.
Yep.
And
that would be rendered actually in a native mobile experience if you are using a mobile when you're exposing or clicking that button in the mobile experience, whenever we get all of the functionalities rolled out as part of the Viva connections. And you build all of that using SPFx, so you have all of the goodies within the SPFx, accessing data, single sign-on, all of that's available. Anything else what you wanted to, are we missing something, Julie?
I don't think so. I think we went pretty deep this time, so hopefully everybody followed along. I'll answer questions after if Derek hasn't. Go ahead, Derek.
Yeah, I've been answering some of the ones in the chat. One thing I just want to point out is we are going to be releasing this as a sample for folks to see how we did this. And that you can, when we release that, you can also just download the SPPKG file, and it will provision itself with sample data. Oh, so you can get it up and running in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, in your like if you have a dev tenant or whatever and you want to see, you can just go download the SPPKG, which is pre-built and in a deployment folder, upload it into your tenant app catalog, get it provisioned, sync to Teams so that it's in your Teams and in the personal app on the left-hand rail, and then go ahead, and as soon as you run it the first time, it will configure itself. It'll give you an option to configure itself with default demo data, or you can start from scratch. Either way, so that's a really good point.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Julie. Really awesome stuff. And it like I said, the sample will be available as part of the 1.13 beta release. So you'll get access. Technically, it's available already in the GitHub, but you can't actually run npm install because the 1.13 is not yet out. So Julie and Derek has been part of the private preview, so they have been having access on the bits.
Right, now, and that's why we did the SPPKG file, so that you can install, even if you don't have the preview bits, like Vesa just said, and even if you weren't in the preview program and you don't have the dashboard, you can still download the SPPKG file, install it in your tenant, and you'll get the Teams app. You just won't be able to put the ACE, even though it's in the package, you won't be able to put it anywhere in your tenant because you don't have the bits to be able to create a dashboard to put it on there.
Until we, as a Microsoft, release those functionalities. So, but we're getting there one step at a time.